This is Resonance by Home. It's an extremely popular song, so you may have heard it before. But can you take a guess as to when this song was released? 1980s? Maybe early 90s? Well, if you guessed any time around then, you'd be wrong. As many of you likely already know, this song was released in 2014, alongside a full album of similar vaporwave sounding music. So then, why does this song sound like it came straight from the 80s? Why did Home choose to recreate this older, dated sound? Resonance is just one example of hundreds of works all connected by a single thread. There's a reason so many modern shows or films don't just take place in the past, but emulate the very technology that we used back then. It's the thread of nostalgia. A sentimental longing or wistful affection for the past, typically for a period or place with happy personal associations. This is the definition of nostalgia, according to the Oxford Dictionary. I love this feeling. It's one of those bittersweet emotions that can truly, deeply affect you. The warmth and potent happiness of reliving a moment you will never forget, only to be met with the stark reality of the here and now. That those moments are gone. It's no wonder why so many modern creations would attempt to capture this feeling. It's a way for us to forget about that reality. And there's no better example of this than video games. As someone who doesn't remember a time without games, it's hard not to feel nostalgic for certain titles. I grew up with the PS2, playing games like Lego Star Wars, Jak and Daxter, and Battlefront. And so, simply hearing even just the name of a game I used to play not only reminds me of the game itself, but that entire chapter of my early childhood. For many of us, games have become such an integral part of who we are that we can devote certain games to entire portions of our lives. And I find that so incredibly interesting. All I need to know is what game someone played as a kid to get an idea of who they are and where their interests lie. It's why there's so many modern games made to look like PS2 or Game Boy games. Just like a song made to sound like your childhood, these games are meant to feel like your childhood, to remind you of a simpler, easier time. But is that all nostalgia is? Just a fleeting feeling of a memory we once had? This game you've been watching in the background is called Tormenture. It too looks like it was ripped straight from the 80s, clearly imitating classic Atari games like Adventure or the first Zelda. But as nostalgic as it is to play, there's something strange about it. It's strange how I feel nostalgic, even though I wasn't even alive back then. There's an interesting sentiment with Resonance. Even for those who weren't alive for the rise of synthwave during the 80s, this song still evokes a strong sense of nostalgia, a longing for a time we never knew. Perhaps nostalgia is more than merely the desire to relive our own past, but to experience the past, to experience a story. But if it's a time where we weren't even alive, how come these works seem so familiar? What makes them feel so comfortable? But more importantly, what happens when that comfortability is stripped away? When that familiarity is used against you? Recently, my friend told me about a little game called web fishing. It's a relaxing fishing game where you can join different lobbies and chat with people, and just take a break from everything to just fish. It's incredibly relaxing and has so much charm to it, and while it's great concept and gameplay wise, the biggest thing that stuck out to me was the art style. It's very much inspired by the original Animal Crossing, with its low poly, pixelated aesthetic, and I adore it. There's a kind of peaceful simplicity to these low-poly graphics, an atmosphere that never ceases to make you feel comfortable. It's a match made in heaven, combining this old aesthetic with a cozy game like web fishing. After all, nothing is more comforting than the memories of playing those old, low-res games as a kid. Countless games emulating a similarly retro art style have only been getting more and more common recently. A Short Hike, Valheim, Shovel Knight, Tunic, Axiom Verge, they're all games clearly meant to blend the old with the new, whether through stylized graphics or gameplay. This re-emergence of the old has made me realize something. These aren't just a way to capture the nostalgia of older games, but are a style of their very own. In 2010, when Pokemon Black and White first came out, they received a ton of backlash for many different reasons, one of the biggest being how it was still 2D. It was a top-down game that utilized pixelated sprites instead of 3D models, and although they did use 3D for most of the environments, it was still very limited. People felt like it was time they moved on to more ambitious graphics. I mean, this is Pokemon we're talking about. The highest grossing franchise in the world should be capable of making a game comparable to some of the best graphics in the industry. But instead, they focused on what they were good at, refining that pixel art style as much as they possibly could. In an interview with Junichi Masuda, the series game director, he spoke about why they stuck with 2D for so long, and the benefits of doing so. There's a lot of personality drawn from the 2D sprites, whereas with 3D, it's the same model used for everything, so the personality doesn't really come out. One of the reasons we've stuck with 2D is to get a more individual feel with it. In the end, it might have been the best decision they've made. Nowadays, people see Black and White as the peak of the franchise, a beautiful representation of the pixel art charm that so many people, including myself, miss a great deal. It was a sort of last hurrah, a celebration of 2D graphics. They went all in, animating each individual part of each sprite to make them move as fluidly as possible. And it resulted in not only some of the best sprite work out there, but truly timeless games that have aged beautifully. It's a big reason why many Pokemon fans want them to return to this style. Many modern games have done this very thing, capturing the essence and love for the 2D era. Octopath Traveler is almost like a spiritual successor to the old Pokemon games, perfectly blending sprites with a 3D environment that feels right at home in this modern era of games. But this appeal isn't exclusive to just 2D games. One of the purest forms of passion for retro graphics I've seen is the demake. Remakes are very commonplace these days, taking what was once a revered and beloved piece of media and modernizing it, hoping to bring in a new audience while still appealing to the original fans. But a demake attempts the opposite. It takes a modern work and compresses it down, almost like putting it through a time machine to convert it to an older, less powerful platform. Bloodborne PSX, made by Botster, is a faithful recreation of Bloodborne in the style of PS1 graphics. Everything down to the soundtrack is remade in this form, and it causes that strange feeling again. The nostalgia takes over. It feels like I'm playing an old PS1 game, but I never had an original PlayStation. I've been playing through The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time for the first time recently. Immediately when playing, I could feel the game's age, and yet I found it to be far more engaging and full of heart than almost any modern game I've played. Right from that title screen, with the beautiful calming melody to the bright atmosphere of Kokiri Forest, I was hooked. After I cleared the dungeon inside the Deku Tree and left Kokiri Forest to set out on my journey to save Hyrule, I walked out into Hyrule Field, and it hit me. The low-detailed yet lively towns, the empty yet endearing world. Even though I had never played Ocarina of Time as a kid, I already had grown this deep love and connection with the game. I started to feel nostalgic, and it's because I've experienced this before. When I played Pokemon Black as a kid, It didn't matter to me if these towns only had 4 houses, or if this small jumble of pixels was supposed to represent a person. To me, these towns were real, each full of buildings, people, and Pokemon. The nostalgia of playing an older game with dated graphics is universal because of one simple reason. Games are constantly evolving. Regardless if it was the massive jump from 2D to 3D, or the 7th generation consoles and their amazing improvements in graphical fidelity, anyone who grew up playing games has had the same experience. We were all kids once exploring that digital world. Whether it was the 8-bit charm of the very first Zelda, or its leap into 3D with Ocarina of Time. These days, games have reached a kind of plateau in their graphics. While there's no doubt they look amazing with their hyper-detailed models and worlds, they all look, well, the same. And with games reaching this level of realism, down to the very peach fuzz on a character's face, they leave no room for imagination. Even though the Hyrule in Ocarina of Time is nothing compared to what we see in Tears of the Kingdom, we can still imagine these simple green textures are real, vast hills. Our minds fill in the gaps to help immerse ourselves in these worlds. It's why even if you've never played these older games, they still feel so familiar. It's why these modern recreations of older games feel so nostalgic. They all elicit that childlike imagination that we all once had.
Another case of a missing child in the town of St.
Tormenture uses that against you. We are put into the shoes of a child playing a game, alone in his room. The titular game we are playing is extremely rudimentary, controlling just a small square representing us. Looking away from the TV, we will find ourselves in a kid's bedroom from the 80s. Old-looking posters on the walls, a cassette player on the desk, an old CRT TV, and even the game console, the Limbo 2800, is a clear play on the Atari 2600. Everything down to the classic method of blowing into the cartridge to clean out the inside. This game wants you to feel as nostalgic as possible, as comfortable as possible. We set out on our adventure and are told to retrieve 4 relics and head north. Exploring each area, we take notes on a little notepad of each room to keep track of where we are. The game even comes with a manual in the same style of old Atari instruction books. It's filled with information to help us find these relics, even with scribbles written in the notes section. But as we traverse, strange things outside of the game begin to happen. Saving at one of the clock towers causes the clock in your own room to go off. When it rains in the game, suddenly you find it storming outside, and entering a dark cave will slam your blinds shut. Certain puzzles will reach beyond the screen, like this maze that can only be solved by listening to a phone call you receive on your chatter phone.
Up, right, down, left, down, right, up, left, up, right, down.
This isn't a normal game. You aren't so comfortable anymore. When opening one of the drawers to our right, we can find a magazine advertising the Limbo 2800. Turning the page, a small piece of paper falls out onto the floor. It's a piece from a newspaper, seemingly about the dangers video games can have on the youth. The safety authority Thomas Jackson believes home consoles have something to do with the recent disappearances of children across the country. From a behavioral standpoint, the device is a bad influence on our children and thus our society. The promise of most products is to escape, to leave the real world to enter a new imaginary one. In the process, the child loses their ability to discern between the two. This was a very real fear back in the 80s. Games were becoming more and more prevalent, and so too was this anti-gaming movement preaching how games are ruining the minds of children, leading to violent tendencies and joining cults. The name mentioned in this newspaper, Thomas Jackson, is an obvious reference to the real-life activist Jack Thompson, infamous for his stand against games for children. Most people rejected these movements, seeing them as nothing more than fear-mongering. After all, there was never and has never been any clear evidence of games affecting the minds of children to this extent. To lose your own ability to discern the game from reality? It sounds absurd, right? Why does modern horror seem to rely so heavily on the old? It's an intriguing question. After all, it's no secret that countless horror games these days use incredibly primitive graphical styles. Iron Lung gains much of its unsettling horror from its use of low-poly PS1 style graphics. The game is already shrouded in mystery, exploring an ocean of blood on a barren moon in a dead universe. The submarine you're piloting wasn't made for these immense depths, so you're welded inside, with the only visual of the outside being through a camera mounted on the front of the sub. You're trapped, helpless at the bottom of a crimson trench. Every echo and groan of the deep puts you on edge, unsure if there's something out there, just on the other side of this metal coffin. The visuals only add to this mysterious terror. There's a level of ambiguity with older games. Low-poly graphics have a sort of incompleteness to it, where you can't quite gather all the details. It's why even some non-horror retro games can cause this uneasy aura. Forcing our minds to fill in those gaps can not only bolster imagination, but horror as well. The atmosphere of the old is terrifying.
Let me in, Mark. I have a gift for you. I have a present. I have a surprise. I will not hurt.
Analog horror is a prime example of this feeling. VHS recordings, found footage, old emergency broadcasts, they too are ambiguous, incomplete. They are full of imperfections, low resolution, film grain, glitchy visuals, and it's these imperfections that we seem to cling to. It's what sets them apart from the high-quality videos we have today, and is also what makes them so creepy. There's almost no need to add any horror, as just raw found footage or old VHS tapes can be innately unsettling. Have you seen those early CGI demos or shorts? While they were great ways to showcase the advancements made in technology and looked incredible back then, nowadays they are horrifying to look at. But as integral as mystery and ambiguity are to horror, there's something that sets these kinds of horror apart from everything else. The same thing that can make us feel comfortable can be our worst nightmare. We all know about emergency broadcasts, and we've all seen old VHS footage. For some of us, it may have even been of ourselves when we were younger. We're familiar with these forms of media, perhaps even nostalgic. Old videos of a family with their child, or the innocence of playing a game as a kid. By taking typically nostalgic things we have a familiar or personal connection to, and mutating it with dark, unsettling elements, it can result in the worst kind of horror. The sense of something you know being twisted and altered into something familiar, but off. Like something is out of place, but you can't quite decipher what it is. Nostalgia is one of the most comfortable feelings, but can also be one of the most blood-curdling. Tormenture has a sort of meta-horror to it. You're in your room, playing a game, as a kid in his room, playing a game. When we play games, we have a certain suspension of disbelief in order to immerse ourselves, a temporary block to the outside world and all your senses. You put yourself into this world, but ultimately it's just that, temporary. When you hear something in your house, or something happens outside of a game, you pull yourself away from it, and your attention switches to the here and now. But in Tormenture, when something happens and you pull away to scan your room, you're still in the game. It makes each of these occurrences far more real. I mean, we've all experienced it. Playing alone in your room late at night, only to hear a noise coming from somewhere in your house, but you're the only one home. This multi-layered immersion, perhaps the line between game and reality, is beginning to blur after all. The NPCs you come across are strange. They all seem cryptic, incomplete. With such limited graphics, it can be hard to interpret exactly what they even are. There's this depressing town with barely any people, a crying man by a well, some sort of creature striking an anvil with its own head, and what seems like children playing catch with a skull. But it gets creepier. In the Red Mansion, you can find a child alone in a room. Changing the input on the TV reveals their twin, trapped on the other side. In another room, there's a man playing with dolls, calling them mommy and daddy. It's as if he's been stuck in here for years, growing old but never growing up. In the forest, there's some kind of bipedal animal with another child, who says he misses his toys. By opening our own toy bin, we can find another clipping from a newspaper, this one about missing children. A 7-year-old boy, 2 9-year-old twins, and a 13-year-old boy, the same one who was on the news when we first turned on the TV. They each just disappeared, as if they had left in the middle of a gaming session. Everything surrounding this game is pointing to one truth, but the only way to confirm that truth is to simply keep playing. At the end of your adventure, after defeating each boss and collecting every relic, the northern dungeon opens up, and we make our way through the maze. Nearing the final boss, we find ourselves in a large room with each and every NPC we've met, all gathered here to witness the end. They each give you their regards. One tells you that there is no turning back, another that it's time for you to join them. What will you become? We enter the next room and find a building in the center. We are told not to go in there. We go inside. No one wants to die. No one wants to grow up, grow old, but time is inevitable. Eventually, it will come for you. This is why we cling so dearly to nostalgia. For a moment, we forget about the passage of time. We get to live in a limbo of our memories and wish we could stay there forever, locked away in an infinite memory. After all, when it comes to horror, what's scarier than losing everything we know and love? What's scarier than everything coming to an end? The largest known star in the universe has a diameter around 2,150 times larger than our own sun. Its volume, 10 billion times our own sun. If it was to replace our sun, it would stretch all the way out to Saturn's orbit, swallowing every planet from Mercury to Jupiter. This is Stevenson 218. The human mind simply cannot fathom things of this size. If we were to be traveling at the speed of light, we could go around our sun's surface in 14.5 seconds. To make the same trip around Stevenson, it would take 9 hours. Space is terrifying. To know that every single star was there when you were born, and every single star will be there after you die. Nothing is more humbling. Nothing is scarier than time. When talking about nostalgia, it's hard not to mention Minecraft. At first glance, it doesn't even seem like that old of a game, until you realize it came out 15 years ago. Kids who grew up playing this game are adults now, working, getting married, having children of their own. Time just continues moving. The term retro game has been used everywhere since the 90s, usually referring to games from an earlier era. Some would say the cutoff was the jump from 2D to 3D. Others that any game more than 10 years old could classify. But it's a subjective term. The word retro purely refers to the recent past. Couldn't it be any game that you feel nostalgic about? Minecraft has been able to stay relevant all these years later, and not in the same way something like Super Mario 64 is still relevant, but truly a mainstay of modern culture. People still play Minecraft like it's brand new. Kids today are playing it for the first time, creating memories that will stay with them even 15 years from now. I mean, it's even getting its own feature film all these years later. Minecraft is timeless. This is why, more than any other game, the nostalgia for Minecraft is powerful. It dominated the childhoods of so many of us, and yet we still continue enjoying it to this day. We didn't just forget about it. That vast imagination we had as kids translated so perfectly to Minecraft, an endless sandbox where that very imagination is your only limit. But the world keeps turning. The sun keeps setting, and time catches up with you. As we grew older, so too did Minecraft. It kept receiving new updates, gaining more detail. Suddenly, it wasn't so easy to fill in those gaps anymore. Our imaginations began to fade, and the game started to feel different. But that doesn't mean those days are truly gone. Because no matter what happens to the game, no matter how many new updates and changes it receives, that music will always be the same. It will always bring us back to when we were kids. The end is terrifying. A dark, empty void. It's in such contrast to the overworld and even the nether. While tainted with fire and dangerous mobs, at least the nether mirrors the overworld in some ways. Netherrack in place of grass, soul sand for regular sand, and oceans of lava. It's all somewhat familiar. But the end is solitary. You spawn on this remote island, floating in this empty vastness of space. One wrong step, and you will be sent spiraling down into the abyss, an infinite void at the end of time with a dragon standing before you. When we look back on Minecraft, our first thought isn't typically of the end. This is because of what the end is. A representation of the inevitable. A reminder of the temporary. The opposite of nostalgia. It is, in a sense, Minecraft's version of space. When you look out into space, when you ponder just how infinite its vastness is, and how small you really are, it's like time just stops. There's this pause moment. Like if you were to traverse this infinite void, nothing would change. It's all the same. Forever. A single second. A few hours, days, weeks, months, eons. It doesn't matter. To an entity as limitless as space, it's all the same. In the end, there is no time. There is something bigger than Stevenson 218. Ton 618 is the largest black hole in the universe. While 10 billion of our suns could fit inside Stevenson, 10 to the 33rd Stevensons can fit within Ton 618. Its event horizon is large enough to fit more than 30 of our entire solar systems in it. We are nothing more than a speck of dust to this monster. And yet, there's something even larger. While Ton 618 was the largest recorded black hole, it has since been dethroned. Phoenix A, another black hole, is even bigger, and in time, it too will be dethroned. Measurements don't even seem worth it for these colossal bodies. Words, pointless. Any attempt of comparison simply cannot be understood. We are simply too small, too insignificant. Why do we dwell on the past if our time here is so short? Why would we have any worth in this universe anyways? We are finite. We are temporary. We are nothing. Right? When you beat the Ender Dragon, when you reach the end of your journey, when you step into that final portal, an end screen appears, and a poem plays. A poem about the player. A poem about you. It begins with 2 lines of text, one blue, one green. They seem to be speaking with each other, aware that the player can read their thoughts, as though they were text on a screen. But these entities are beyond the screen. They say that this is how the player imagines things when within the deep dream of a game. A question is simply asked, what did this player dream? They say the player dreamed of sunlight and trees, of fire and water. They created worlds that flourished from their imagination. They say there's still more. A level that cannot be achieved within the short dream of a game. One that can only be reached in the long dream of life. One of them asks, does the player know we love it? That the universe is kind? Sometimes, through the noise of its thoughts, it hears the universe, yes. One speaks of how there are times the player creates worlds with no summer, no sunlight, worlds of darkness. But these dreadful creations aren't just within the short dream of a game, but the long dream, life. And although merely figments of their imagination, they take these sad creations for reality. One entity wishes they could tell the player of these delusions, to tell them of their importance to the universe, that what they create is their own reality. But they can't. To tell them how to live is to prevent them from living. The entities reveal themselves. We are the universe. We are everything you think isn't you. You are looking at us now, through your skin and your eyes, and why does the universe touch your skin and throw light on you? To see you, player, to know you, and to be known. I shall tell you a story. They go on to tell this story, a journey of dreams, both long and short. One about the universe, and about the player. Sometimes it thought itself on a spinning globe of molten rock, where the sun could burn one's skin, and sometimes it thought itself in a world of blocks, where days are short and death is but a minor inconvenience. They would find themselves lost in a story, sometimes dreams of their own, sometimes reality. But the player is a story, and this story is the player. From the birth of the player to the birth of the very atoms of the universe, they're all connected. And the universe said, I love you. And the universe said, you have played the game well. And the universe said, everything you need is within you. And the universe said, you are stronger than you know. And the universe said, you are the daylight. And the universe said, you are the night. And the universe said, the darkness you fight is within you. And the universe said, the light you seek is within you. And the universe said, you are not alone. And the universe said, you are not separate from every other thing. And the universe said, you are the universe tasting itself, talking to itself, reading its own code. And the universe said, I love you because you are love. And the game was over, and the player woke up from the dream, and the player began a new dream, and the player dreamed again, dreamed better, and the player was the universe, and the player was love. You are the player. Wake up. I think about this poem a lot. I think about the past a lot. I reminisce on those days as a kid where I had no worries, no problems, just pure bliss. A time I so dearly miss. Time has flashed in front of me. It feels like just yesterday I got my first Xbox and made my first Minecraft world with a friend from school. But time kept moving. And it continues moving. Why dwell on the past? Why indulge ourselves in nostalgia if our time here is so short? Why care at all with a universe so grand and cruel? Too vast and too large to care for our existence. This poem disagrees. It disagrees that we are nothing, that our existence is pointless. If we can reach such heights, such brilliance within a dream, within a game, we have the power to make that dream a reality. It's okay to reminisce on our past, because that is our story, and our story is important. We are important. You are important. The one watching this video, the one who got out of bed this morning, even though it can be hard, even though it can be difficult to keep moving, to keep fighting, to keep breathing, to find a reason, to find love. But you are love. You are the player. Wake up. In Ocarina of Time, Link loses his childhood. A boy forced into a destiny of saving the world at the cost of his early life, his innocence. Link doesn't get to reminisce about those days because they never happened. Even though he gets sent back to his childhood at the end of the game, he isn't the same kid from before. He's forced to live with the trauma that came with becoming the hero of time. And perhaps worst of all, Navi leaves him. he can't return to his hometown. His home, his childhood, is gone. Memories are treasures, perhaps the greatest treasure one could have, and so we should treat them as such. We can't take them for granted. That warm feeling of a bygone time, the bittersweet peace you get should be cherished. Even times that you may not have been around for, memories that may not be your own, are special because that familiar feeling, no matter where it comes from, can be a source for joy. At the very end of the end poem, there is a final quote. 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the ones you did do. So throw off the bowlines, sail away from the safe harbor, catch the trade winds in your sails, explore, dream, discover. So don't give up on your memories, and don't dread your future. Live the life you can look back on with a smile. Reminisce about your early childhood. Share your time with the people you care about. Laugh and cry and take pride in yourself. Because more than any game, it's your story that people will remember. So, that got a bit more existential than I thought it would. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, remember to leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more of me. And if you really like what I'm doing here and want to support me even further, I just made a Patreon, link is in the description. There you'll get to see some behind the scenes on videos and some other exclusive perks. Also, feel free to join my Discord server, link is also in the description. As always, my name is Ember, and I'll see you next time.